In today's episode of At the Podium, we move beyond destinations and passports and into the quiet, courageous work of becoming yourself. For more than 20 years, Cole Sjoholm built a successful career in banking and finance as a top producing loan originator. By every outward measure, his life was working. But in 2023, he did something extraordinary. He traveled solo to all seven continents in a single calendar year. It all began with a simple question he was asked at a New Year's Eve party. If given the opportunity to see the world, would you go? 5 days later, the trips were booked, and Cole began a year-long journey as a solo traveler across the globe, from Antarctica to Australia, Europe to Africa, Asia to South America, and new discoveries of his own North America. Along the way, he learned that travel isn't only about checking destinations off a list. It's about gaining perspective of what is possible in the world, about recognizing that we are individual threads that, when woven together, create a beautiful fabric, and discovering who you are when you stand alone in unfamiliar places. This is At the Podium, and I'm Patrick Huey. Today, we're talking about courage, identity, and what becomes possible when you say yes to the life that's waiting beyond what you thought was possible, with Cole Sjoholm. But before we begin, make sure you subscribe, share, and leave great reviews to support my podcast. Cole is the author of the blog Mortgage Guy Travels the World and the book Filling My Bucket, a year of solo travel across 7 continents. He's now working on a follow-up book that focuses on capturing the humanity he encountered through street photography and unplanned portraits from his journey around the world. Cole, welcome to At the Podium.
Well, hello, Patrick. How are you today?
I'm great. How about you?
Yeah, doing great as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I read your book, and it was quite a beautiful moment in time of this amazing journey that you went on across all 7 continents, which we're going to get into today. But I wanted to start as I was reading the book, there were 7 continents because there are 7 continents. And I was really pulling out some really interesting things that you said about each continent. So I'd love to have you just sort of reflect back on some of the things that you actually said. And we'll start with the one that most people have probably never been to, which is Antarctica, in which you said, there are always people in your corner who are cheering you on, even when you may not realize it. And
Yeah.
so I wonder for you, who are those people who were in your corner cheering you on through this amazing 2023 of your life?
Well, in that specific moment, it meant my cruise ship friends that I had met on that particular journey. They had learned about my quest to set on all 7 continents that year, and that was the last continent of my year. So number 7, and that's a big deal. Whether you do it in 1 year or you do it in a lifetime, it's a huge accomplishment regardless. And they became my cheerleaders in that moment. They were snapping photos, documenting, that day when I actually set foot on the continent. And only later did I find out that they were doing that. So that specific quote had to do with that moment when you realize that there's people cheering for you even when you don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the bigger sense of the story, there is also a lot of people in my life that were cheering for me. And sorry, it's a little bit emotional actually to talk about it. But, coworkers at work that helped make the year possible, friends and family that were all part of the journey. And yeah, it was incredible.
You mentioned your coworkers at work, and one thing that I found really interesting in your story is that even though you're traveling around the globe, and you're not doing it every month, it's not like that when you're doing this kind of journey, you still were the top producer in your business, which is unbelievable. I mean, most people show up every day and they're not at the top producer, and you're doing this really life-changing journey and you're still producing, really, really being productive at work. How did that even happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, it brought a lot of clarity and focus, and I find that I perform best when I have that clarity and focus in my life. So I knew what my why was in the year,
Mm.
and mortgage allows me to work remotely and support my life and do those sorts of things. But because of that clarity and focus, I worked harder and was more engaged as an employee than ever before. And that was a lot of give and take with my employer. I mean, they certainly made sacrifices with me not being there all the time, providing resources to help accommodate the travel and security that was associated with that. And then in turn, I was working very hard because I had this big travel expense that I had to pay for. So it was a win-win.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Okay, so you went to Europe, and I love that you didn't do like France, Rome, London. You sort of did the northern tier of Europe, which is great. And you wrote when you went to Norway, you said when you stepped onto the shores of Norway, you felt a sense of home. And I wonder what that sense of home was like for you.
I'm a Scandinavian descent, and last name is very Swedish, and also have some Norwegian blood in me. But I guess being there, it felt familiar. I grew up in northern Michigan, up on the shores of Lake Superior, so the scenery was somewhat similar as far as trees and lots of water. Uh, People looked somewhat familiar too, just facial features and things like that. But also, it felt like a sense of belonging and like I finally made it. It was a place I'd always wanted to go and explore. And it was just special to be there and have that achievement in my life of, finally meeting a destination that I wanted to be at and finally being there.
It's interesting when I spent 3 or 4 years living in the Caribbean, and I didn't have necessarily a sense of feeling at home when I was there because I didn't feel at home there. It was you definitely are an American in a different country, but to look around and see people who look like you everywhere is a really unique experience. Because here, our countries are, in America at least, we're so big, we're so broad, and and it's the melting pot experience here. But when you go places and just see yourself reflected everywhere, it's really a different kind of awareness of who you are that you don't always necessarily get here on the North
Yeah,
America,
it's
US.
powerful, right? I mean, whether it's foods or other cultural associated pieces to your identity, when it's so prevalent, it becomes more powerful and you actually recognize it in a way that you don't in everyday life. And that's part of what I loved. The year itself was filled with different moments. And it's interesting as the world has become a bigger melting pot. There's pieces of culture that's identifiable in every continent, with maybe the exception of Antarctica, that was a little bit different. But the other six, definitely there's, Western cultures represented there. It's embraced in different ways in different parts of the world. And then also, I loved the idiosyncrasies of other cultures and being exposed to a world that's so much bigger than what we see every day.
I haven't traveled to all 7 continents. I think I've been to 3 or 4. But when you see the world in a much broader context than just your neighborhood or your state or your own country, you do start to see the sort of idiosyncratic things that make places really unique and beautiful. And at the same time, there is this whole merging of the human experience that people are really after sort of the same things everywhere, which you described as that feeling of belonging and feeling like they matter in whatever existence they're in. So I think that's one of the really interesting things that you start to see people in a much more broader context, but also in a much more familiar context because the urges are very similar.
Yeah, I use the analogy that we're all like little individual threads. And when woven together, we make this beautiful fabric or quilt. Individually, we're beautiful on our own, but the power and the strength is the bonds between us that link us. And, that was a big takeaway. Might be a little profound, but there was a lot of wake up calls in this year of travel, and I really enjoyed it.
What were some of those wake up calls?
I use the analogy or the common analogy is YOLO or you only live once.
Right.
And I kind of spun that a little bit into YODO or you only die once, meaning that you get to live every day and every day is an opportunity to make the most of it and find the good, enjoy what you've got going on. It might not always be good or it might not always be perfect, but there's always at least one good thing every day. And if you can appreciate that moment for what it is, it can totally change your mindset. To me, only living once would be a missed opportunity. So taking that opportunity to actually live every day and not just go through the motions was really kind of a big takeaway. And it happened early in the year.
Something that you wrote in relation to that was this idea of a bucket list, and everyone has that bucket list. And I love that you said that you weren't doing a bucket list, but that you were filling your bucket. I thought that was a very profound statement because it's like, why are you waiting? Why are there these things that you're just waiting to do? And shifting the perspective on these sort of marquee moments in your life, not being about an end, but actually filling you in the moment and beyond. I kind of love that actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, it became the title of my book, so it was impactful to me also. But it is a different way of mindset. People talk about bucket list destinations and bucket lists all the time. And actually, in Australia, which was the first continent that I visited outside of North America, on the way home, it's when I came up with that idea where the world is so much more grand, and there's so many more destinations that I'll get to visit than even in the last year where I went to all 7 continents, 25 different countries, 50 different destinations. And on that flight home, I was like, there is so much more than I can ever see. There is no way I can create a list of everything that I want to see and do in this lifetime. So instead of looking at it as like marking things off and accomplishing something, I'm actually filling my bucket, taking something away from each of these continents, growing, learning about myself, which is really the purpose of the year. And, using it as a growth mechanism instead of a detractor or a completion mechanism.
Mm.
And yeah, it's a different way of life for sure.
Yeah, the learning is ongoing. It's not just checking something off a list, it's actually investing in it.
Yeah, and I mean, I had the fortune. I went to all these beautiful different destinations, and there's not a single place that I wouldn't want to return to. So how do I check that off the list if I want to go back and explore more? It's impossible to say that my exploration of those places was complete.
When I travel, this is so esoteric, but sort of like you were saying, when I travel, I'm always like, there are 8 billion people on the planet or close to that number. I want to see them all. And so when I travel, I'm so fascinated by the people and the lives, and like that every person I'm seeing has a story and has a journey. And I'm curious, genuinely curious about who they are and what they're doing. And I'll never see them again. To your point, when you travel, these things start to awaken within you.
Well, I mean, probably why you're the podcast host, right? And you have this platform and this method of delivering that message because it resonates with you. I actually completely agree and connect with that same mantra, where the year was about connections as much as about the different destinations. I grew friendships from people all over the world that were bound by this unique love and joy of travel. And I was a solo traveler, so there's multiple instances where people welcomed me into their own vacations with their families or partners. And, we would have dinner together, we would go out and sightsee together. And those connections were so important, as important as all these different destinations. And always appreciate all of those people. Again, they became my cheerleaders in a lot of ways. And just wonderful, wonderful friendships were formed.
You just mentioned Australia a few years ago, a few minutes ago, and you said of Australia, you said you would never forget it, that it was a pinch you moment. And I wonder, why was it so special? I mean, you said it was the first, so maybe that's why, but why was it so special for you?
So Australia was really very special just because, like you hit on the, first continent outside of North America. But then also as you got to explore Australia, the people there were absolutely welcoming. And I think part of that is because it's so far removed from the other continents. They see a new person and they're excited to get to,
Hmm.
know different cultures and different people, to the point where when I was in my Uber from the hotel up to a cruise ship that I was getting on, the Uber driver insisted that I sit in the front seat with him so we could chat on the hour-long drive and get to know each other.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen in other parts of the world for sure. It's like,
Yeah.
a very transactional relationship. And that curiosity was just wonderful. It was found throughout Australia. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. Scenery is gorgeous, and I can't wait to go back.
Mm. Okay. And then Asia. I lived in Bangkok for a year and I've traveled a lot in Asia. I'm in Southeast Asia. And so what you said of Asia was that you noticed the silence of Tokyo, which I totally understand. And then what you said of Nagasaki was quite beautiful. You said, only there and only in that moment was I able to fully realize the true impact of history. So for people who don't know, that's where the atomic bomb was dropped in World War II to essentially end the war. And people have opinions about that on both sides. But I would love for you to speak to that moment when you're at the point, you're there when the atomic age was born.
It's stunningly beautiful and emotionally impactful. You're in this park where there's a monolith directly below where the bomb exploded. The bomb exploded in the air, not at ground level, which changes how the radiation impacts the topography and the lasting impact. But you're in this park with, maybe a couple hundred to 1,000 people, and there's literally not a dry eye in the place. Again, beautiful scenery, and also you realize the impact of what happened there. And in a way that I feel that if people would visit these sites, and there's, sites of horrible human atrocities all over the world, Nagasaki being one of them. But I feel strongly that if we visited those places, absorbed what happened there, that we could change and prevent it from happening again.
Mm.
And with all the interesting things happening in the world right now, I'll use interesting as maybe the most politically correct word that I can. Uh, I do feel that we're probably closer to something bad happening than we have been in a while. However, if we took a moment and realized the impact of what those events have, we could easily stop that from happening again.
Yeah. When I went to Dachau, which is outside of Munich, it's not too far from Munich in Germany. It was the first time I'd ever been to a concentration camp. And it's something when you step into these places, it does shift your perspective on, oftentimes we celebrate, like right now, we're shooting this during the Olympics. So we're really celebrating the power and spirit of what the human physical form can accomplish through great sacrifice and sometimes great pain, the great things that we can accomplish. And then you turn it around and you look at Nagasaki or you look at Dachau or you look at the internment camps in California where the Japanese citizens were sent during World War II, and you also see the propensity that we have to harm each other. And so when you stand in those moments of conflict, it just gives you a broader perspective of what can be and what shouldn't be, and how do we step more towards what can be and reject what shouldn't be.
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, very well said. And again, I feel more similarities, more that combines or binds us than differences. And the differences are obviously pronounced and definitely what we talk about in a lot of different instances. However, human nature is not all that different. And that's part of what I definitely experienced firsthand in the year of travel. Um, you know, whether it's going to the grocery store, going to a bank, or going to your job, similar, very mundane daily life pieces, but happiness, meals around a table, just appreciating others' company, those are things that bind us regardless of culture, race, religion, things like that.
Yeah.
And, that's where I look for the similarities versus the differences.
Well, you went to South America and you went to Buenos Aires and you said there is creativity in the air or the water, but it flows from the Argentinians freely into the world. And you go to Iguana Falls. And so you really, in South America, really lean into this idea of a deep sense of creativity and a deep sense of nature.
Completely. And Buenos Aires is, like you said, you definitely did your homework, so I appreciate that. But the musical talent in Buenos Aires is unlike anywhere else I experienced in the world. The performers on street corners, which are nearly every street corner, are absolutely remarkable. And it's just woven into part of their everyday life and fabric, where, it's part of how the city celebrates those sorts of talents. And it
Mhm.
was absolutely beautiful to observe. It's also super pleasant when you're in an outdoor cafe or having a meal out on a, plaza or patio. just being surrounded by that type of talent, it really enhanced the experience in ways that was very different from anywhere else that I experienced in the world, and certainly at that magnitude. Um, Speaking of Iguazu Falls, it was probably my favorite singular destination, and it was totally unplanned. I met a gentleman who'd been traveling the world for several years on my Asia trip, and that was in November of 2023. And he insisted that I go to Iguazu Falls. He's like, "You're going to be so close. It's only a 2 hour flight from Buenos Aires up to Iguazu." And he said, "It's one of those places that if you don't go, you're going to regret it. And you're not going to know you regret it until you go."
Mm,
So I mean, 10 days I was going to Argentina. I only had a short time between when I returned home from Asia and when I went to South America. So I booked a ticket and, a day trip where, I got up at 5 a.m., flew up to Iguazu, spent 10 or 12 hours exploring the national parks there, and then flew home. And it really changed me in a way that he described, where this boat ride, when you're approaching the falls, you can see the falls on the Brazilian side, and then you make a turn and you go to the Argentinian side of the falls, and water's just pouring on top of you in
uh,
this deluge. That, number one, it probably wouldn't happen in other parts of the country or other parts of the world for safety concerns,
right.
but it does happen, and it happens every day, and there's no safety issues. But it was one of the most fun and most enjoyable, hearing the shrills and shrieks and just genuine laughter from the people that were on the boat with me was one of those moments that I will never forget. It was so much fun, so enjoyable, so refreshing. It was like 100 degrees and 100% humidity, a very, very hot day, probably the hottest day in the year of travel. And just the refreshing nature of that, and the takeaway and the camaraderie with all these people that I had never met before, just met on this boat tour, and experiencing nature and the power of nature in that way was really impactful. And it's one of those destinations I tell people, it may not be on your radar, it may not be on your bucket list, but it needs to be, because it is truly impactful and gorgeous.
I cannot wait to go to South America. There's so many countries and cities I want to visit. So Iguazu, sorry, not iguana, Iguazu Falls is now on my list because of your book, actually. Um, Africa. Africa, you said you had an issue checking into the hotel and the rooms and all of that kind of thing that was going on. But you wrote in the book, you said that, my dear friends, is personal growth. The Cole of 2010, 5, or even 1 year ago would have likely reacted differently to the situation that you were in. Um, so why was that your continent of personal growth?
Really, because there's these moments in time that you get to choose how you react to different situations. And I was proud of how I reacted in that moment, which is definitely not always the case. There's many, many times that I wish could go back and do things differently. But in that moment, there was a little bit of a fiasco with check-in at the hotel. It was significant financial burden to me to correct or fix what was a perceived issue from the hotel with a credit card type and currency charged, and what that conversion rate meant to me personally. And I'm 31 hours away from home via flight. There's not a lot of options. So I could choose to check in and deal with it and continue with this vacation that I dreamed about going to for 20 years. I could reject the hotel's claim and upcharge, try and find another hotel, which doesn't seem like a great option when there is not a lot of additional time. Like, I'm on the continent, like ready to check in. Uh, it's not a huge touristy destination, so there's not a ton of hotel options. And or I could let it spoil my vacation and just be upset about it. So check in and be upset that the hotel overcharged me for my week-long stay, and really let that taint and uh, just upset or spoil the time there. And I chose the first one. I'm like, no, I'm going to check in. I can deal with this later. I can dispute the charge with the hotel. I can dispute the charge with the credit card company. I've wanted to be here for 20 years. I'm going to check in and do this and do it my way and have fun. But what I learned from that is by giving those people the grace that they needed and also allowing them to serve me spectacularly. Best hotel service of anywhere I experienced last year. It was a beautiful way to just reflect personally on my options and how I could have affected the outcome of that interaction. And in turn, became my favorite hotel of the year. The staff was absolutely wonderful, best housekeeping of any hotel I've ever stayed in my life. And I rave about the hotel now. So, they have come around and corrected their issue and acknowledged that it is a problem that they need to address. They refunded me the overage and everyone's happy. So there you have it.
See, now you are a very experienced traveler if you're talking about the quality of the housekeeping. So I'm like, this man knows what he's talking about.
I was a hotel restaurant management major. Travel has always been in my blood, and the year really was a dream to do. I had no idea I had this dream until the question was proposed to me. But it there was things that you notice in different hotels, and certainly traveling 167 nights in a single year, you're exposed to a lot of differences in service levels and types of accommodations. Sometimes I stayed in very swanky hotels. Sometimes I definitely was a more conscious traveler, and there's great in all of it.
And then North America, where we live, you wrote, you get a new and unique perspective of how beautiful our own country and continent are. It's easy to overlook what you look at on a regular basis. I think that's so true. I mean, when I travel across the country, and I think I've been to most states now, I haven't been to Alaska, but America is a beautiful country. It's vast. And that's one thing that you lose sight of sometimes, like how big and vast and spread out it is. But it's really a beautiful country. And I think, the American spirit that was born through the revolution and the Civil War, civil rights, the women's movement, this time that we're in now, the American spirit, the American character has given the world so much. I seconded your view of North America and the US in particular.
I did extensively travel throughout North America, went to multiple new destinations that I'd never been to before. I didn't just count North America as a continent because I live here. And it wasn't until much later in the year, and I was coming back home to Colorado and really appreciated what I get to look at every day. And it was reinforced actually in the Africa trip when I was beach hopping and exploring beaches with a tour guide and come up to this totally undeveloped beach that has a single like two rut dirt road leading up to it and walking around and exploring this unspoiled beauty. And tour guide is like, it's just another beach. And you need to check yourself. This is unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. And it's so easy to not appreciate what you get to look at every day because it's so commonplace. And same thing happens here in Colorado, and it probably happens everywhere, whether you're in a cornfield in Iowa, a major metropolitan area, down south in Tokyo and Buenos Aires, wherever in the world, you stop appreciating what you get to look at every day because it's common. But there's people that have traveled from all over the world to look at what you get to look at every day. So stepping back and getting out of the mundane and appreciating what you get to look at or what you get to do or what you have in your life, it just becomes this really powerful mindset that allows you to appreciate and value the planet and your life itself.
7 continents, 1 year. What were you looking for in this year?
Very early on, I started a travel blog, and the purpose that I wrote in my very first post was I wanted to learn about myself, who I was, what I wanted out of life. I was newly single, really for the first time since high school, and I didn't have a lot of that self-discovery and growth earlier on in life. And I wouldn't trade my past for anything. Experiences and people that I've got to know through those relationships have been remarkable, and I would never want to change that. However, this was a year about me, and it was meant to be selfish and excessive and all of the things that people labeled it to be. But none of that mattered because I was learning who I was and what I wanted this next phase of my life to be. So that's really what the travel was about. I got to go through this journey of personal discovery and growth, surrounded by the most beautiful scenery in the world. So the story is a little bit unique that way. But the story of personal growth doesn't have to be grand and excessive like that. It was just an opportunity that I saw and I took it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I have zero regrets about it. But you don't have to do something grand and excessive to go through the journey that I went through. It can be, visiting a town next door. It can be taking a picnic on your lunch break and just appreciating what you get to look at every day. It's remarkable. And the human connection is really what made the year so special. The destinations were wonderful, but not at all what it had to be. It was, very fun. I zero regrets again, but the travel was just part of the component that allowed me to do it. And it forced me to do things that I was uncomfortable with, whether that be dining out alone or, wandering off in a city and approaching someone and asking to take their photo in an unplanned portrait. Photography became a huge part of the year for me, where it's a great solo hobby because I joke that there's only one lens for a reason. So my camera became my travel buddy.
Yeah.
And they became my souvenirs of the year, all these photos. And, the connections that I made through photography were great.
In your story, you really lean into this being a year of solo travel and sort of coming to grips with, and you talked about you were in one of your blogs, you wrote, spinning around the globe has brought me more self-reflection and growth than anything else I've ever done. And that's a bold statement for a guy that came back out of the closet at 37 years old. That's the blog post. New beginnings start with an end. So it's an interesting piece that you lean into this idea of being solo on this trip, and sort of, I guess, looking at the friction of this around your identity that you have. Were you able to sort of give yourself some clarity around that?
Yeah, you learn that you are enough by yourself individually. And that doesn't mean that relationships or family or other people in your life don't make you stronger. But what I learned about myself anyway is that, like, I am enough wholly myself, and you have to love yourself in order to be able to really love other people and appreciate life. And that's what this big takeaway was from the year is that, I'm enough myself. I'm proud of myself. I've worked hard. There's a lot of great people in my life. Again, those cheerleaders that helped support me both in that journey and as well as in life itself. And, sometimes it takes stepping away or stepping outside of your comfort zone to really look back and reflect and appreciate what you have. So that was that big circle moment of, how travel connected the dots of life really. And, work, personal, travel, like all these different components of life, and like looking at this big holistic picture and really appreciating every day.
I love in your book, you lay out the stats of what you did. You said 110,000 miles flown, 71 flights, 167 nights in hotels, 118 Ubers and taxis, 6,900 miles driven, 25 countries, 50 destinations, 7 continents in 1 year. When you step back and look at that huge story that's there, what do you think?
Number one is I'm proud. It is an accomplishment to do that. The 110,000 miles flown is equivalent to circling the globe 4 times in an airplane. So I didn't jump from one continent to the other. I came back and forth home to Colorado during pretty much every one of those continental visits, because I had to work and I had responsibilities here. It wasn't just this year of going out and having fun. We talked about earlier still being a top producing loan officer. And work was a big part of that year. So I went out and had fun and I would come back and I was still working when I was gone too. But getting back to the travel scoreboard, it was a way to keep track of this quest to meet a goal. And, I guess being accountable to myself and having that scoreboard and tracking the continents was the number one priority. But then there became these other little categories that became fun to keep track of. So, like the miles flown, like I was curious, how many times am I going to really circle the globe in this year of travel? And it became a point of fun with my cheerleaders. They definitely loved the flip flop category. They were all cheering for me to have lost or broken more than one pair of flip flops in the year. However, I'm very proud of that. There was a very close instance where I almost lost a second pair. And, just a little category like that is the one that generated all the comments. Every time I'd post an update to the travel scoreboard, people were commenting, "Oh, I was kind of hoping that you would have lost or broken another pair of flip-flops." And there was fun little moments in those updates that people resonated with. And, it was just a really fun way to connect or stay connected with friends and family while I was traveling.
Mm. When you do something that big, what is next for you?
It's a great question, and it's actually one that I struggled with. My Antarctica visit, again, was the last continent of the year, and I cried a lot in Antarctica. Um, the year was coming to an end. This incredible journey was coming to an end, and I didn't know what was next. It was so much of the focus was just on this one year and this singular travel component, and the personal growth and all of that again was the reason why. But you do get lost in the goal or like the physical component of meeting a goal. So I didn't know, and I struggled with that, and I'm still, I guess, refining the answer a bit. Travel's absolutely still going to be part of my life moving forward, and both solo travel as well as with friends and in a new relationship as well. The big goal, and I put it out there just because it's very similar to last year. It's beyond what I ever thought was possible. I want to figure out how to get to outer space and see the world from above and appreciate its beauty in a very holistic form from outside of our planet is really the goal. I have no idea how it's going to happen. I'm a huge believer in manifestation and vision boards and things like that. So as I've moved past last year and looking into the future, I want to figure that out.
Outer space, everyone's so fascinated by what's past those clouds that we see.
Yeah. And again, it's another destination, right? Like
Yeah.
I can't wait to come back home to planet Earth. There's no doubt about that. But I think being able to appreciate Earth from that viewpoint or that vantage point would be remarkable. There's plenty of other destinations here on planet Earth that I can't wait to explore, but why not shoot for the moon?
In this season of the show, Cole, I'm talking to people about the legacies they leave, and I wonder what that will be for you, or do you want that to be for you with all you've done and experienced in the past 20 years?
Legacy, I think I haven't figured it out yet. I want people to remember me for being a genuine person, for caring both about them and the world itself. But, legacy is not something that I am actively choosing to do things to leave. That makes sense. Like I want to, legacies for other people, their opinion and their review of my life, not for me to decide, in my opinion. However, I do want to be known as a good person and a steward of our earth and really the opportunity to live life here. So I want to be known for that legacy, I guess, to someone that lived their life to the fullest.
Mm, that's beautiful. Cole, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your story and your journey.
Yeah.
And to those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice and we all will leave a legacy. Use yours wisely. Bye, everyone. And thank you, Cole.
Okay, thank you so much.